They called her the family's greatest shame. Too plain, too clumsy, too wrong for any decent man. So when her beautiful sisters filled out that mail-order bride application as a cruel joke, they never imagined what would happen next. The wealthy rancher who opened that envelope, he didn't want perfection. He wanted truth. And the woman they sent to humiliate him would become the greatest love story the Wyoming Territory had ever seen. Stay until the end and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Nora's story travels. The late afternoon sun hung low over the Bennett farmhouse in Missouri, casting long shadows across the peeling porch where Nora sat with her mending basket. Her needle moved in practiced rhythm through the torn hem of her youngest sister's dress, the third one this month. Caroline was careless with beautiful things, probably because beautiful things came so easily to her. Through the open window, Nora could hear her sister's laughter spilling from the parlor like champagne from a too-full glass. Vivian's voice rose above the others, bright and sharp. "Oh, this is absolutely wicked. Mother would die if she knew." "Mother doesn't have to know." That was Caroline, always the boldest. "Besides, it's just a bit of fun. No harm in it." Nora's needle paused. Her sister's fun usually meant humiliation for someone, and lately, that someone was always her. "Read it again, Viv." Margaret's voice joined in, sweet as poisoned honey. "The part about seeking a woman of gentle nature and modest beauty." More laughter. Nora set down her mending and moved quietly to the window, staying just out of sight. Vivian cleared her throat dramatically. "Rancher seeking bride. Widower, age 36, owner of the Rourke Creek Ranch in Wyoming Territory. Seeking woman of gentle nature, modest beauty, and strong character for marriage. Must be willing to relocate. Serious inquiries only." She paused for effect. "Can you imagine? The man's probably ancient and desperate." "With a ranch that size?" Caroline snatched the newspaper. "Father heard about the Rourke Creek operation from his business associates. This Jack Rourke fellow is supposedly worth a fortune. Cattle, land, everything. The gossips say he's been alone for 5 years since his wife died." "Then why would someone so wealthy need to advertise for a bride?" Margaret's tone was skeptical. "Who cares?" Vivian laughed. "The real question is, who should we send him?" The silence that followed made Nora's stomach turn cold. "You're not thinking—" Margaret's voice held a note of delicious scandal. "Oh, but I am." Vivian's words dripped with malice. "Dear, sweet, unfortunate Nora, 24 years old and never been courted. Father's greatest disappointment. The daughter who inherited mother's mousy hair and father's unfortunate nose instead of any of the Bennett beauty." "Vivian, that's cruel even for you," Margaret said, but she was giggling. "Is it? Or is it genius?" Vivian was warming to her theme now. Think about it. This rancher wants modest beauty. Well, Nora's certainly modest. He wants gentle nature. She's about as threatening as a church mouse. And strong character? She's put up with us for 24 years, hasn't she? Caroline howled with laughter. "Oh God, the look on his face when she steps off that train. I ordered a bride and they sent me a scarecrow." "We'd be doing them both a favor, really," Vivian continued, her voice taking on a mock-serious tone. "Nora gets out of Father's house. You know he's desperate to marry her off to anyone. And this rancher gets, well, he gets exactly what he deserves for being too cheap to court a woman properly." "How would we even do it?" Margaret asked, and Nora could hear the shift in her voice, from mockery to genuine conspiracy. "Simple. We fill out the response form in her name. Father has that daguerreotype of her from last year, the one where she's squinting because the sun was in her eyes. Makes her look even worse than usual. We send it with a lovely letter about how she's eager to begin a new life out west." "And when Father finds out?" Caroline's voice held a trace of hesitation. "Father won't find out until it's done," Vivian said firmly. "By the time the rancher responds, if he even does, it'll be too late to back out without embarrassing the family. You know how Father is about appearances. He'll force her to go through with it just to save face." "It's absolutely wicked," Margaret breathed. "It's absolutely perfect," Vivian corrected. "Now, help me compose this letter. It needs to sound sincere. Dear Mr. Rourke, I am writing in response to your advertisement." Nora backed away from the window, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. She should storm in there, confront them, tear up whatever letter they were composing. She should march straight to her father's study and expose their scheme. But she didn't. Because underneath the hurt and humiliation, a tiny seed of something else was sprouting, something that felt dangerously close to hope. What if? The thought was barely formed before she crushed it. This was a joke. A cruel, elaborate joke that would probably amount to nothing. The rancher would never respond. And even if he did, even if he was desperate or foolish enough to accept their proposal, what then? She'd be shipped off to Wyoming territory like a piece of unwanted furniture, delivered to a man who'd taken one look at that awful photograph and decided even she was better than nothing. No, she wouldn't let herself hope. Hope was for her sisters, with their golden hair and dimpled smiles, their suitors lined up like soldiers waiting for review. Hope was for girls who looked in mirrors and saw something worth wanting. Nora saw only what everyone else saw. Plain features, ordinary brown hair, eyes too large for her face, a figure too thin to be fashionable and too shapeless to be interesting. 24 years of being invisible in a family of beauties had taught her exactly where she stood, but as she picked up her mending again, her hands were shaking. But 6 weeks later, the letter arrived. Nora was collecting eggs from the henhouse when she heard Vivian's shriek of laughter carry across the yard. Her stomach dropped. She knew that particular quality of laughter, the kind that came at someone else's expense. By the time she reached the house, all three sisters were crowded around the dining room table, passing a thick envelope between them. Their father stood nearby, his expression unreadable. "Father, you have to see this," Caroline gasped between giggles. "Our little joke actually worked." Thomas Bennett's eyes found Nora standing in the doorway, and something flickered across his face. Shame, perhaps, or calculation. "Nora, come here." She approached slowly, still clutching her basket of eggs. "It seems," her father said carefully, "that you've been corresponding with a gentleman in Wyoming territory." The eggs nearly slipped from her grip. "What?" Vivian thrust the letter at her, eyes dancing with malicious glee. "Oh, don't play innocent. Your rancher has accepted your proposal. He sent train fare and everything." Nora's eyes scanned the thick paper, written in a bold, masculine hand. "Dear Miss Bennett, I received your letter and photograph with great interest. Your words showed character and sincerity, qualities I value above all others. I am prepared to offer you marriage and a home here at Rourke Creek Ranch. I will not mislead you about the nature of this arrangement. I am not a romantic man, and I do not make promises about love or passion. What I can offer is security, respect, and a comfortable life. Wyoming is hard country, and ranch life is demanding, but for a woman of strong constitution, it can be rewarding. I have enclosed fare for the train journey to Cheyenne and onward to Red Mesa Station, where I will meet you on the 15th of September. If you find these terms acceptable, send word immediately. The choice is yours entirely. Respectfully, Jack Rourke." Beneath the letter was a bank draft for an amount that made Nora's breath catch. This wasn't the act of a desperate man. This was someone who meant business. The 15th, Margaret leaned over Nora's shoulder. "That's less than 2 weeks away." "Well, Nora?" Their father's voice was harder now. "What do you have to say for yourself? When did you begin this correspondence behind my back?" Nora looked up from the letter, her eyes moving from her father's stern face to her sister's gleeful expressions. They wanted her to confess to the scheme, to expose herself and save them from consequences. Or better yet, they wanted her to refuse to go, to become the laughingstock who couldn't even hold on to a husband she'd never met. But as she stood there, holding this stranger's straightforward letter, something crystallized inside her. He had read her sister's mockery of a letter. She had no doubt it was full of lies and exaggerations. And he had responded not with flowery promises or romantic delusions, but with honesty. "I am not a romantic man. The choice is yours entirely." There was a strange dignity in that, and more importantly, there was an escape. An escape from this house where she would always be the plainest daughter, the greatest disappointment. An escape from watching her sisters marry well while she withered into spinsterhood, becoming the unmarried aunt who lived in the attic and helped raise other women's children. An escape from mirrors that showed her all the ways she failed to measure up. If this rancher wanted, well, she'd spent 24 years developing exactly that. I'll go, she said quietly. The room erupted. You'll what? Vivian's face went pale. Nora, don't be absurd, Caroline sputtered. It was just, we didn't think. You didn't think what? Nora's voice was steady now, stronger than she'd heard it in years. You didn't think he'd actually respond? You didn't think I'd actually go? She turned to her father. This gentleman has made me an honorable proposal. If you'll permit it, Father, I'll accept. Thomas Bennett studied his daughter for a long moment. Whatever he saw there, desperation or determination or some mixture of both, seemed to satisfy him. Very well, it's an unusual match, but the man appears to be of good standing. I'll make the arrangements. But Father, Vivian started. Enough. His voice cut through her protest. Your sister has received an offer of marriage from a respectable man. That's more than I dared hope for at her age. We'll see her properly prepared and sent off with appropriate dowry items. As her father left the room, Nora felt 3 sets of eyes boring into her back. You're actually going to do it, Margaret whispered, and for the first time there was something other than mockery in her voice. Fear, maybe, or a dawning realization of what they'd set in motion. Yes, Nora said simply. I am. But you don't even know him! Caroline's voice rose to a near shriek. He could be horrible. He could be cruel or ugly or honest, Nora interrupted, which is more than I can say for the men around here who smile to my face and laugh behind my back. She met each sister's gaze in turn. Thank you, truly. You've given me something I could never have managed on my own, a way out. She left them standing in stunned silence and climbed the stairs to her small bedroom under the eaves. Only when the door was safely closed did she let herself unfold the letter again with shaking hands. The choice is yours entirely. Was it, though? She was choosing between humiliation here and the unknown there, between slow suffocation and a leap into darkness. Some choice. But as the September sun slanted through her window, Nora felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. Not quite hope. She wasn't fool enough for that. But possibility, maybe. The sense that her life, which had seemed so firmly set in its disappointing pattern, had suddenly cracked open to reveal something else underneath. She pulled out her mother's old trunk from under the bed and began to pack. The next 12 days passed in a blur of preparation and barely concealed panic. Her sisters veered wildly between guilt-ridden attempts to dissuade her and spiteful comments about what awaited her in Wyoming. Her father threw himself into practical arrangements with the same business-like efficiency he applied to everything, as if shipping his daughter off to marry a stranger was no different than negotiating a cattle sale. Only her mother seemed troubled. Elizabeth Bennett found Nora folding clothes on the eve of her departure. May I come in? Nora nodded, not trusting her voice. Her mother sat on the edge of the bed, smoothing her skirts in a nervous gesture Nora had inherited. I know what your sisters did. Nora's hand stilled. Vivian has a conscience, buried though it may be. She came to me last night, in tears. Elizabeth reached for Nora's hand. You don't have to do this. We can send word that you've taken ill. We can... No. The word came out harder than Nora intended. Mother, when has anyone in this family ever seen me? Really seen me? Nora, you dress me in Caroline's hand-me-downs because why waste money on new dresses for the plain daughter? Father forgot my last birthday entirely. Vivian introduced me to her suitor's business partner as just the spinster sister. I'm 24 years old and I'm already invisible. That's not true, isn't it? Nora pulled her hand away gently. I've watched you, Mother, the way you look at me sometimes, and I can see you wondering how you produce something so ordinary. I'm not angry about it anymore. It just is what it is. But this rancher, this Mr. Rourke, he has no expectations of beauty. He's not comparing me to Vivian or Caroline or anyone else. He just wants someone who can work hard and keep a house and be honest with him. And is that really enough for you? Her mother's voice was soft. A marriage without love? Nora thought of the dances she'd never been asked to, the suitors who'd looked right through her on their way to court her sisters, the future she could see stretching ahead with painful clarity, growing old in this house, becoming more invisible with each passing year until she disappeared entirely. Maybe love is overrated, she said. Maybe respect and honesty are better. At least they're real. Elizabeth Bennet looked at her daughter for a long moment, and something shifted in her expression, recognition perhaps, or a kind of sorrowful understanding. You're stronger than I ever gave you credit for. I've had to be. Her mother stood, then surprised Nora by pulling her into a fierce embrace. Then go and be strong, and write to me. Not your father, not your sisters, me. Tell me the truth about how you are. I will, Nora whispered into her mother's shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of lavender water, and letting herself be held like she hadn't been since childhood. After her mother left, Nora returned to her packing. At the bottom of her trunk, wrapped in one of her own carefully mended shawls, was a music box that had belonged to her grandmother. It was the only beautiful thing she owned, the only heirloom that had come to her instead of to one of her prettier sisters. She wound the key and listened to the delicate melody fill her small room. Tomorrow she would board a train heading west, toward a territory she'd only read about in newspapers, toward a man she knew only through one brutally honest letter. The music box played on, sweet and sad, and Nora Bennet let herself imagine, just for a moment, what it might be like to be seen. Yet, the train station in St. Louis was chaos incarnate, a swirling mass of travelers, merchants, families saying goodbye, porters shouting about luggage, the metallic screech of trains arriving and departing. Nora stood on the platform clutching her carpet bag, her trunk already loaded, and felt her courage waver. Her father had accompanied her this far, handling the tickets and travel arrangements with his usual efficiency. Now he stood stiffly beside her, clearly uncomfortable with the emotional requirements of the moment. "You'll write when you arrive," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, father. And if things are unsuitable, you can always, I'll be fine." She said it firmly, as much to convince herself as him. He nodded, relief evident on his face. Thomas Bennet had never been equipped to handle his daughter's emotions. "Your mother sent this." He handed her a small package wrapped in brown paper. "She said not to open it until you're on the train." Before Nora could respond, he'd pressed a quick, awkward kiss to her forehead, the most affection he'd shown her in years, and disappeared into the crowd. Nora stood alone on the platform as passengers flowed around her like water around a stone. The conductor was calling for final boarding. Her train, the one that would carry her away from everything she'd ever known, was releasing great clouds of steam, like a dragon preparing for flight. This was it. The last possible moment to change her mind, to return to the Bennet house and accept her fate as the unmarried daughter, the disappointment, the one who was never quite enough. She thought of Jack Rourke's letter. "The choice is yours entirely." And she stepped onto the train. Her seat was by a window in a second-class car, not the luxury her sisters would have demanded, but clean and comfortable enough. She stored her carpet bag overhead and settled into her seat just as the train lurched into motion. St. Louis began to slide past her window, familiar streets giving way to unknown territory. Nora pressed her palm against the cool glass and watched her old life recede. Only when the city had disappeared entirely behind her did she remember her mother's package. She unwrapped it carefully to find a small leather journal, its pages blank and waiting, and a short note in her mother's elegant script. "My dear Nora, I have not been the mother you deserved. I let my own vanities and disappointments blind me to your quiet strength. But I see you now, and I am in awe of your courage. This journal is for your new life, for the woman you will become when you are finally free to be yourself. Write in it honestly. Write your truth, and remember that you carry my love with you, even if I failed to show it properly. Your loving mother." Nora clutched the journal to her chest and stared out at the rolling Missouri countryside, blinking back tears she refused to let fall. She wouldn't cry. She wouldn't doubt. She had made her choice, and she would see it through. The train carried her west for 3 days. She watched the landscape transform from the green familiarity of Missouri to the endless prairie of Kansas, then to the high plains where grass stretched to the horizon and the sky seemed impossibly vast. Other passengers came and went. A family with noisy children, a dignified elderly couple, a young man who kept trying to catch her eye until she made it clear she wasn't interested. At night she lay in her narrow berth and listened to the rhythmic clatter of the wheels, feeling the distance grow between who she had been and who she was becoming. She wrote in her mother's journal by lamplight. September 12th, 1884. Somewhere in Kansas, I wonder what he looks like. The letter said nothing about his appearance except that he is 36, 12 years older than me. I wonder if he is tall or short, dark or fair, handsome or plain. I wonder if it matters. In his letter, he wrote that he is not a romantic man. I've been trying to decide if that frightens me or relieves me. Romance in novels always seemed like a trap. All those breathless feelings and desperate passions that make sensible people act like fools. Maybe it's better to build something steady instead of something that burns bright and burns out. Or maybe I'm just telling myself this because I've never had the chance to be romanced, and I'm trying not to mind. The train pulled into Cheyenne on a bright September morning that felt like stepping into a different world. The air was thinner here, sharper, carrying scents Nora had no names for, sage and dust and something wild that made her heart race. The town sprawled before her in a jumble of false-fronted buildings and wide dirt streets, nothing like the ordered civilization of Missouri. She had 4 hours before her connecting train to Red Mesa, so she wandered the main street with her carpet bag, trying to absorb this strange new reality. Cowboys and dusty chaps lounged outside saloons. A woman in a split riding skirt strode past, rifle slung over her shoulder, and nobody gave her a second glance. Back home, such a sight would have caused a scandal. Here, it was just Tuesday. Nora found herself standing outside a telegraph office, staring at the door. She could still send word, could still say she'd changed her mind, that she was coming home. Her father would be disappointed but unsurprised. Her sisters would laugh themselves sick. A weathered man in a cattleman's coat pushed past her into the office, muttering about beef prices. Through the open door, she caught a glimpse of the telegraph operator, fingers flying over the keys, sending messages that would race along copper wires to distant destinations in seconds. She thought of Jack Rourke's letter again. That brutal honesty. I am not a romantic man. What kind of person put that in a proposal? Someone who'd been hurt, maybe. Someone who'd loved and lost and decided safety was better than passion. Or someone who simply told the truth because lies were too much trouble. The door swung shut. Nora turned away without entering. She spent her remaining time in a small restaurant, forcing down stew she couldn't taste while a table of ranch hands talked loudly about the coming winter and cattle drives and 100 other things she didn't understand. One of them caught her eye and tipped his hat with a friendly smile. She looked away quickly, heat rising to her cheeks. When the whistle blew for the Red Mesa train, Nora gathered her things with trembling hands. This was the final leg. 4 more hours and she'd be standing face to face with the man she'd agreed to marry. The countryside grew wilder as they traveled north. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks already dusted with early snow. The train followed a river through a canyon where red rock walls towered overhead, then emerged onto rolling grassland that seemed to stretch forever. Nora pressed her face to the window, trying to imagine living in all this space. Back home, you were never more than a mile from a neighbor. Here, you could ride for days and see nothing but sky. As the afternoon sun began its descent, the train slowed. A tiny station appeared ahead, barely more than a platform and a small building with Red Mesa painted on the side in fading letters. Beyond it, Nora could see the town itself, a modest collection of buildings clustered along a single main street. Her stomach twisted itself into knots. The train hissed to a stop. The conductor helped her down, unloading her trunk with casual efficiency. "Someone meeting you, miss?" "Yes," Nora managed. "I think so." "Well, good luck to you then." He tipped his cap and climbed back aboard. Within minutes, the train was pulling away, leaving her standing alone on the platform with her trunk and carpet bag, the wind tugging at her skirts. The platform was empty except for a rangy yellow dog sleeping in the late afternoon sun. Nora's heart sank. Had she gotten the date wrong? Had he changed his mind? Then she heard footsteps on the wooden planks and turned. Jack Rourke was not what she'd expected. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean, weathered look of someone who spent his life outdoors. His face was all hard angles and sun-bronzed skin, with deep lines around his eyes that came from squinting into distances. Dark hair touched with gray at the temples. A a strong jaw shadowed with stubble. He wore work clothes, canvas pants, a plain shirt, a leather vest, and he carried his hat in his hands as he approached. His eyes were gray, the color of storm clouds, and they studied her with an intensity that made her want to look away. But she didn't. She'd promised herself she wouldn't start this marriage by being a coward. He stopped a few feet away. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, he broke the silence. "Miss Bennett?" His voice was deep, rough-edged, the kind of voice that didn't waste words. Nora nodded, not trusting her own voice yet. "Jack Rourke." He didn't offer his hand. "Your journey was all right." "Yes, thank you." Another silence stretched between them. He was still studying her with those gray eyes, and Nora felt heat crawl up her neck. She knew what he was seeing, exactly what her sisters had described. Plain features, mousy hair coming loose from its pins after 3 days of travel, a dress that had been unfashionable even before it became a hand-me-down. The photograph they'd sent had been bad, but reality was probably worse. She lifted her chin slightly, meeting his gaze. If he was disappointed, she'd rather he say it now. But his expression didn't change. He simply nodded once, as if confirming something to himself, and picked up her trunk like it weighed nothing. "Wagons this way. We've got about 2 hours to the ranch. We should head out before dark." He started walking. Nora grabbed her carpet bag and hurried after him, her shorter legs struggling to match his stride. The wagon was plain but well-maintained, pulled by 2 sturdy horses who nickered softly as Jack loaded her trunk. He offered her his hand to help her up to the seat, and Nora took it. His palm was rough with calluses, his grip firm but careful. He climbed up beside her, took the reins, and clicked to the horses. The wagon lurched forward, wheels creaking, and Red Mesa Station began to recede behind them. They rode in silence through the outskirts of town. Nora tried not to stare at everything, but it was impossible. The mountains were so close now, purple-blue against the evening sky. The land rolled away in all directions, golden grass rippling in the wind like an ocean. The air smelled of earth and growing things, and that wild scent she'd first noticed in Cheyenne. "It's beautiful," she said softly, not really meaning to speak aloud. Jack glanced at her. "It's hard country. Beautiful, yes. But hard. Winters are brutal. Summers can be droughts. The work never stops." It sounded like a warning. Nora nodded. "I'm not afraid of hard work. I read that in your letter." There was something in his tone she couldn't quite identify. Not mockery exactly, but not quite belief either. "You said you were raised on a farm, that you knew how to cook, clean, mend, preserve food, that you weren't afraid of an honest day's labor." He quoted the words precisely. Nora's cheeks burned. Those had been her sister's words, not hers. But they weren't entirely lies. She had done all those things, even if the letter had made her sound more capable than she felt. "Yes." "Good." He kept his eyes on the road. "I've got a housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, who comes in twice a week. She's been managing things since my wife passed, but a ranch this size needs more than that. I need someone who can handle the house, help with accounts, manage supplies. Someone steady. Someone steady. Not someone beautiful or charming or accomplished, just steady." It was the lowest bar possible, and yet Nora felt a flutter of anxiety that she might not even clear it. "I'll do my best," she said quietly. Jack nodded, but didn't respond. They fell back into silence. The road, really more of a rutted track, wound through increasingly wild country. They passed a few small homesteads, smoke rising from chimneys, lights beginning to glow in windows as evening approached. Then even those disappeared, and there was nothing but grass and sky and the creak of the wagon wheels. Nora studied Jack Rourke from the corner of her eye, trying to understand the man she'd agreed to marry. His hands on the reins were steady, confident. He sat straight-backed but relaxed, moving easily with the wagon's motion. Everything about him spoke of competence, of a man who knew exactly what he was doing and had no need to prove it. But there was something else, too. A guardedness, perhaps. A sense of walls built high and thick. "Your letter said you were a widower," Nora ventured. "How long—" She stopped, suddenly aware this might be too personal a question for a man she'd known all of 30 minutes. 5 years. His voice was flat. "Sarah died in childbirth. The baby, our son, lived. Thomas is 4 now. The way he said it, so matter-of-fact, so carefully emotionless, told Nora everything and paid the price for it. "I'm sorry," she said. "It was a long time ago." But it wasn't. Not really. 5 years might seem long, but grief didn't follow calendars. Nora thought of her grandmother's death when she was 12. How even now, 12 years later, she sometimes turned to share something with her before remembering she was gone. "Is that why you advertised for a wife?" The question was out before she could stop it. "For your son? To give him a mother?" Jack's jaw tightened. "Partly. Also because ranchers around here need wives. It's practical. A man can't run a place this size alone, and I'm tired of the town gossips trying to match me with every available woman in 3 counties. He glanced at her. "I figured someone from back east wouldn't know me, wouldn't have expectations. We could be clear about what this is." "And what is it?" "A partnership, an arrangement. You help run the house and look after Thomas. I provide for you, protect you, treat you with respect. We build something practical together." He paused. "I'm not looking for romance, Miss Bennett. I don't have that in me anymore. But I can offer you a decent life if you're willing to work for it." It should have stung, that clinical assessment of their future together. But instead, Nora felt something in her chest loosen slightly. At least there would be no pretense. No need to try to be something she wasn't. He wanted practical, and practical she could do. "That seems fair," she said. He nodded, apparently satisfied, and they lapsed back into silence as the sun continued its descent toward the western mountains. The light was nearly gone when they crested a rise and Jack pulled the horses to a stop. "There," he said, pointing. Nora looked where he indicated and felt her breath catch. The ranch spread out in the valley below, backdropped by foothills that glowed purple in the twilight. The main house was larger than she'd expected, a sprawling structure of logs and stone with a wide porch wrapping around at least 2 sides. Outbuildings clustered nearby, barns, a stable, what might be a bunkhouse, various sheds and corrals. Beyond them, she could see cattle dotting the grassland, dark shapes in the fading light. Lamplight glowed in the house windows, warm and welcoming against the gathering dark. "It's bigger than I thought," Nora said softly. 3,000 acres of deeded land, another 2,000 in grazing leases, about 800 head of cattle, though that'll grow after spring calving. I run it with 4 permanent hands and hire on extra help during roundup and drives. Jack's voice held quiet pride. "My father started this place with nothing but a land grant and determination. I've spent the last 10 years building it into something that'll last." He clicked to the horses and they started down the slope. As they drew closer, Nora could make out more details, the neat fence lines, the well-maintained buildings, the sense of order and care that pervaded everything. Whatever else Jack Rourke might be, he was clearly a man who took pride in his work. A dog began barking as they approached, and a figure emerged from the barn, a lanky man in his 20s who raised a hand in greeting. "That's Ben Cooper, my foreman," Jack said. "He's been with me since he was 16. Good man, steady hand. You'll meet the others tomorrow." They pulled up in front of the house, and Ben hurried over to take the horses. "Boss, ma'am." He touched his hat brim to Nora, curiosity evident in his face, but politeness keeping him from staring. "Ben, this is Miss Bennett. We'll be married tomorrow." Jack swung down from the wagon with easy grace, then reached up to help Nora down. "Married tomorrow?" Nora repeated faintly as her feet touched the ground. "I thought, Pastor Michaels is riding out in the morning. Figured there was no point in waiting." Jack was already pulling her trunk from the wagon bed. "Unless you need time, I can send word to postpone if—" "No." Nora's voice came out steadier than she felt. "No, tomorrow is fine. What difference would waiting make? She'd already traveled halfway across the country to marry this man. Another day, another week, it wouldn't change the fundamental nature of what they were doing." Jack nodded and hefted her trunk. "Come on. I'll show you to your room. Mrs. Chen left supper warming, and you must be hungry." Nora followed him up the porch steps and through a heavy wooden door into the ranch house. The interior was dim, lit by a few oil lamps, but she got an impression of solid furniture, clean floors, and a surprising lack of clutter. This was a man's space, practical and spare, but not uncomfortable. Jack led her down a hallway and opened a door. This was Sarah's sewing room. I had it converted. He set her trunk down and lit the lamp on a small dresser. The room was modest but clean, a narrow bed with a thick quilt, the dresser, a washstand, a single wooden chair. A window looked out toward what she thought might be the barn, though it was too dark to tell for sure. "It's small," Jack said, and for the first time she heard something like apology in his voice. "But it's yours. I'm across the hall, Thomas next to me. Bathing room is at the end of the hall. We've got a gravity-fed system from a tank on the roof. Not fancy, but it works." "It's fine," Nora said. More than fine, actually. For the first time in her life, she'd have a room that was just hers, not shared with sisters or relegated to whatever space was left over. "Thank you." Jack lingered in the doorway, as if there was something else he wanted to say. In the lamplight, the lines in his face seemed deeper, shadows collecting in the hollows of his cheeks. He looked tired, Nora realized. Not just physically tired, but soul tired. The kind of weariness that came from carrying too much for too long. "I know this isn't what most women dream of," he said finally. "Coming to a strange place, marrying a man you don't know, taking on someone else's child. If you want to back out, I'll arrange passage back to Missouri. No judgment, no questions asked." It was the second time he'd offered her an escape, Nora realized. Once in his letter, "The choice is yours entirely," and now again. He kept giving her chances to run. "I don't want to back out," she said quietly. "I came here with my eyes open, Mr. Rourke. I know what I'm getting into." That wasn't entirely true, of course. She had no idea what she was getting into, but she knew what she was leaving behind, and that was enough. Something shifted in Jack's expression, relief, maybe, or respect. "Jack," he said, "if we're getting married tomorrow, you should call me Jack." "Jack," she repeated. The name felt strange on her tongue, too intimate for someone who was still essentially a stranger. "And you should call me Nora." He nodded. "Nora, then. Get yourself settled. I'll bring up some supper in a bit. We eat early around here, ranch hours, but I figure you're too tired for company tonight." "Thank you, Jack." He left, closing the door softly behind him. Nora sank onto the edge of the bed, suddenly aware of just how exhausted she was. 3 days of train travel, the stress of meeting Jack, the surreal feeling of sitting in a house in Wyoming territory that would, by tomorrow evening, be her home. She unpacked mechanically, hanging her few dresses in a small wardrobe, setting out her brush and mirror on the dresser. At the bottom of her carpet bag, she found the music box, still wrapped in her shawl. She set it carefully on the dresser, then on impulse, wound the key. The tinkling melody filled the small room, delicate and impossibly sweet. It was a sound from her old life, a reminder of who she'd been before she became someone who married strangers for practical reasons. A soft knock interrupted the music. "It's Jack, I've got supper." Nora quickly shut the music box and opened the door. Jack held a tray laden with stew, fresh bread, and coffee. The aroma made her stomach clench with sudden hunger. "I heard music," he said as he set the tray on the dresser. "My grandmother's music box. I'm sorry if it bothered." "It didn't bother me." He glanced at the small wooden box, something unreadable crossing his face. "Sarah used to play piano. Not well, but she enjoyed it. I haven't heard music in this house in 5 years." He paused at the door. "It was nice. Hearing it again." He left before Nora could respond. She ate her supper slowly, savoring the rich stew that was better than anything she'd expected. Through the window, she could hear the sounds of the ranch settling in for the night. Horses moving in the barn, the distant lowing of cattle, men's voices calling goodnight to each other. She thought about Jack's words. "I haven't heard music in this house in 5 years. What kind of life was that? Empty of music? Empty of anything soft or beautiful? Just work and survival and the ghost of a dead wife?" And tomorrow, she would become part of that life. Nora washed up using the basin on the washstand, then changed into her nightgown. The bed was softer than she'd expected, the quilt thick and warm. She lay in the darkness, listening to unfamiliar sounds, and tried to imagine the day ahead. There would be a wedding. She'd stand next to Jack Rourke and make vows that were supposed to be sacred and permanent. She'd promised to love and honor a man she'd spoken maybe 50 words to. And then she'd be his wife, bound to him by law and custom, and the sheer impracticality of turning back. Sleep should have been impossible, but exhaustion dragged her under like a riptide. She dreamed of trains that went nowhere, of standing on platforms while strangers studied her with gray eyes, of music boxes that played wedding marches in empty houses. Morning came too soon. Pale light filtered through the curtain, and somewhere in the house she could hear movement. Nora lay still for a moment, gripped by paralyzing fear. What had she done? What insanity had possessed her to travel across the country to marry a man she didn't know? Then she heard a child's voice, high and questioning, and Jack's deeper rumble in response. The mundane sounds of a household waking up, a life going on, waiting for her to become part of it. She rose and dressed in her best dress, a simple blue cotton that Caroline had passed down 2 years ago. It was too big in the shoulders and too short in the hem, but it was the nicest thing she owned. She pinned up her hair with shaking hands, staring at her reflection in the small mirror. Plain Nora Bennett, about to become plain Nora Rourke. Same face, different name. Same disappointment, different location. No, she wouldn't think like that. She would be practical, like Jack wanted. She would work hard and earn her place here and build something steady, even if it was never beautiful. Breakfast was waiting in the kitchen when she ventured downstairs. Jack stood at the stove, flipping pancakes with surprising dexterity, while a small boy sat at the table, swinging his legs and chattering about horses. And Ben says I can help brush thunder when I'm bigger, but I'm already big, Papa. I'm 4 whole years, and that's very big. And the child stopped abruptly as Nora entered, his eyes going wide. He was beautiful, this motherless boy. Dark curls like his father's, but bright blue eyes that must have come from his mother. A spattering of freckles across his nose, a gap where he'd lost a front tooth. Thomas, Jack said quietly, this is Miss Nora. Remember what I told you? The boy nodded solemnly. You're going to be my new mama. The word hit Nora like a physical blow. Mama. This child, this perfect innocent child, was going to call her mama, and she had no idea how to be anyone's mother. She barely knew how to be herself. Hello, Thomas, she managed, her voice coming out softer than intended. It's very nice to meet you. Are you going to live here forever? He asked with a child's directness. Yes, I think so. Good. He returned to his pancakes with the easy acceptance of a 4-year-old. Crisis averted, stranger accepted, life continuing. Jack caught her eye over Thomas's head, something almost apologetic in his expression. Coffee's hot. Pastor should be here within the hour. Nora poured herself coffee with hands that had steadied somewhat and took a seat at the table. Jack served her pancakes without asking, then sat down with his own plate. They ate in a silence broken only by Thomas's periodic observations about everything from ants to clouds to whether horses could swim. It was surreally domestic, like they were already a family, just trying on the roles to see if they fit. The pastor arrived right on time, a weathered man in his 60s with kind eyes and a firm handshake. Jack, you must be Miss Bennett. I'm Pastor Michaels. I've known this stubborn cuss since he was knee-high to a grasshopper. Watch your mouth around the boy, Jack said mildly, but there was affection in his voice. The boys heard worse from the ranch hands, I'm sure. Pastor Michaels winked at Thomas, who giggled. Then his expression grew more serious as he looked between Jack and Nora. You two sure about this? Marriage is a serious undertaking. We're sure, Jack said. The pastor's eyes lingered on Nora. Miss Bennett? She thought about her sister's laughter, her father's disappointment, the life stretching behind her like a prison sentence. She thought about Jack's honest letter and Thomas's gap-toothed smile and the way the mountains looked purple against the morning sky. I'm sure, she said. All right then. Let's make it legal. They stood in the parlor, morning light slanting through the windows. Thomas sat on the sofa, swinging his legs and watching with solemn interest. Pastor Michaels opened his Bible and began to read. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here. Nora barely heard the words. She was too aware of Jack standing beside her, tall and solid, his shoulder almost brushing hers. He'd put on a clean shirt for the occasion, she noticed, had even shaved. The gesture felt significant somehow, a sign that this mattered to him even if it was just practical. Jack Rourke, do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. His voice was steady, sure. Nora Bennett, Do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? This was it, the moment of no return. After this, she would be bound to this stranger in the eyes of God and law. I do, she whispered. Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Pastor Michaels smiled. Jack, you may kiss your bride. Jack hesitated, and Nora saw uncertainty flash across his face, the first real emotion she'd seen from him besides careful control. Then he bent down, slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. She didn't. His lips brushed hers, light as a whisper, over in a heartbeat. But in that brief contact, Nora felt the rough calluses on his hands where he'd cupped her shoulders, smelled the faint scent of leather and soap, sensed the tightly leashed strength in the way he held himself so carefully gentle. Then he stepped back, and it was done. Congratulations, Pastor Michaels said warmly. May God bless this union. Thomas jumped off the sofa and ran to them. Are you my mama now? Nora looked down at this child who would never remember his real mother, who was looking up at her with such hope in his blue eyes, and felt her heart crack open just a little. Yes, she said softly. I suppose I am. He grabbed her hand, his small fingers trusting and warm. Good. Papa said you'd teach me to read. Did he now? She glanced at Jack, who had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. Thomas has been asking, he said gruffly. I can teach him numbers and ranch work, but reading, he trailed off. I can teach you, Nora told Thomas. I used to help at the Sunday school back home. The boy beamed. Jack's expression softened slightly. Pastor Michaels looked between them with approval. Well, I'll leave you folks to it, the pastor said. Jack, I expect to see you all in town for services when you can manage it. After he left, an awkward silence descended. They were married now, husband and wife, partners in this practical arrangement, but they were still strangers, still uncertain how to be around each other. I should get to work, Jack said finally. Cattle don't care about weddings. Mrs. Chen should be here soon. She can show you around properly, explain how things work. All right. He hesitated, then pulled something from his pocket. This was Sarah's. I want you to have it. He held out a simple gold band. Nora stared at the ring, understanding the significance of what he was offering. His first wife's ring, the symbol of a love that had ended in tragedy. I can't, she whispered. Why not? It's hers. It wouldn't be right. Jack's jaw tightened. She's gone, Nora, and you're my wife now. She would have wanted it used, not sitting in a box collecting dust. Still, Nora hesitated. Taking this ring felt like overstepping, claiming something that wasn't meant for her. Please. The single word, rough with something that might have been pain, decided her. She held out her hand. Jack slipped the ring onto her finger. It was slightly too large, loose enough that she'd need to be careful not to lose it, but it felt right somehow. A weight, a promise, a reminder that this was real. Thank you, she said softly. He nodded, already turning away. I'll be back at midday for dinner. Thomas, you help Mrs. Rourke today, you hear? Yes, Papa. And then he was gone, boots heavy on the porch, his voice calling to Ben about checking fence lines or something equally incomprehensible to Nora's city-bred ears. She stood in the parlor with her new son, wearing a dead woman's ring, in a house she didn't know, married to a man she'd met yesterday. Thomas tugged her hand. Want to see my room? Papa says I have to keep it clean now that you're here. I'd love to see your room, Nora said, and let him lead her into her new life. Thomas's room was a disaster of wooden toys, scattered clothes, and mysterious objects that might have been rocks or possibly petrified food. He chattered constantly as Nora surveyed the chaos, explaining the origin and importance of every item with the earnest intensity only a 4-year-old could muster. And this is my special stick that looks like a snake, and this rock has sparkles in it, and Papa says I can't keep bringing things inside, but I forget sometimes. And this is my horse that Ben carved for me. See how the tail moves? Nora knelt down to examine the carved horse, which was actually quite beautiful. Ben made this? Uh-huh. For my birthday. He makes all kinds of things when it's winter and too cold to work outside. Papa says Ben's got magic hands. I think your papa might be right. She spent the morning with Thomas, gently organizing his room while he helped by moving things from one pile to another. He talked the entire time, a constant stream of observations and questions that should have been exhausting, but somehow wasn't. There was something soothing about his presence. Mrs. Chen arrived around 10, a small Chinese woman with sharp eyes and efficient movements. She looked Nora up and down with an expression that gave away nothing. "So, you are the new Mrs. Rourke." "Yes, ma'am. I'm Nora." "I am Mrs. Chen. I have been keeping this house since the first Mrs. Rourke passed. Mr. Rourke tells me you will be taking over most duties, but I will still come twice weekly to help with heavy cleaning and laundry." There was something in her tone that might have been challenge, or might have been simple statement of fact. Nora couldn't tell. "I'd appreciate any help you can give me," Nora said carefully. "This is all very new to me." Mrs. Chen's expression softened slightly. "You are honest. That is good. Come, I will show you the kitchen, the pantry, the root cellar. You must know where everything is." The tour was thorough and slightly overwhelming. Mrs. Chen had been managing this household with military precision, and she had strong opinions about everything from how to organize the pantry to the proper way to black a stove. Nora took mental notes, trying to absorb the flood of information. "Mr. Rourke and the men eat big meals," Mrs. Chen explained as they stood in the well-stocked pantry. "Breakfast at dawn, dinner at midday, supper at dusk. Ranch work burns energy. You must cook plenty, always have coffee ready. Keep bread fresh. Wednesday is baking day, Thursday is laundry. Friday the men come to the main house for accounts and pay." "What about Thomas?" Nora asked. "What does he usually eat?" "Same as the men, just smaller portions. He is a good eater, no fussing." Mrs. Chen paused. "He is a good boy, lonely but good. The men try their best, but a child needs a mother." The weight of that statement settled on Nora's shoulders. This child needed a mother, and she was supposed to be it, despite having no idea what she was doing. "The first Mrs. Rourke," Nora ventured. "What was she like?" Mrs. Chen's face closed down immediately. "That is not my place to say. You should ask Mr. Rourke." But Nora knew she wouldn't. Jack had made it clear he wasn't interested in discussing his first marriage, and she wasn't about to push. By midday, she was exhausted from trying to remember everything. Mrs. Chen left with a promise to return on Thursday, and Nora found herself alone in the kitchen, staring at the stove and trying to remember how to cook for ranch hands. She settled on something simple: fried potatoes, bacon, biscuits, and strong coffee. It wasn't fancy, but it was filling, and she managed to have it ready when Jack and two of his ranch hands came trooping in, bringing the smell of horses and dust with them. "Boss, this is a pleasant surprise," one of the men said, a stocky fellow with a graying beard. "Been a while since we had a hot meal at midday." Jack shot him a look. "Mind your manners, Pete. This is my wife, Mrs. Rourke. Nora, this is Pete Williams. He's been with me for 8 years. And that's Sam Yates, joined us last spring." Sam was younger, barely 20, with an easy smile. "Ma'am, welcome to Rourke Creek." "Thank you," Nora said, serving plates with hands that shook slightly. Would the food be good enough? Would they compare her to Sarah? But the men ate with the focused intensity of people who did physical labor all day, barely stopping to breathe between bites. Pete asked for seconds. Sam complimented the biscuits. Even Jack nodded with what might have been approval. "This is good," he said simply. "Thank you." It was such a small thing, that thank you, but it made something warm bloom in Nora's chest. She'd done something right. She'd fed them, and they were satisfied. Thomas chattered throughout the meal, telling his father about helping Nora organize his room and asking when he could go see the new calf in the barn. The men indulged him with the easy affection of people used to having a child around, and Nora found herself relaxing slightly. Maybe this could work. Maybe she could build a place for herself here. After the men returned to work, Nora cleaned up the kitchen with Thomas's help, then spent the afternoon exploring the house more thoroughly. It was larger than it had seemed last night, with a parlor, dining room, Jack's study, and several other rooms whose purposes weren't immediately clear. Everything was clean but sparse, the home of someone who'd stopped caring about comfort or beauty years ago. The only room that felt different was Thomas's, with its chaotic collection of treasures. The rest of the house felt like a shell, functional, empty of personality. Nora found herself in the parlor, staring at a piano pushed against one wall. It was covered with dust, clearly untouched for years. This must have been Sarah's piano, the one Jack said she'd played not well, but enjoyed. On impulse, Nora lifted the cover and pressed a key. The note rang out, slightly out of tune, but still sweet. Thomas came running. "You can play piano?" "A little. My grandmother taught me." Nora sat on the bench and played a simple melody she'd learned as a child. Her fingers were rusty, stumbling over notes, but the music filled the empty room like light filling darkness. Thomas climbed up beside her. "Can you teach me? Would you like to learn?" He nodded eagerly, and Nora found herself showing him how to find middle C, how to press the keys gently instead of banging them. He had his father's long fingers, she noticed. He'd be good at this if he practiced. They were still playing, or rather, Thomas was experimentally plunking keys while Nora corrected his finger positions, when Jack came in for supper. He stopped in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "Sorry," Nora said quickly, closing the piano cover. "I didn't mean to. We were just—" "It's fine." His voice was rough. "I told you, it's nice to hear music again." He looked at Thomas. "Go wash up for supper, son." After Thomas scampered off, Jack lingered. Sarah bought that piano 6 months before she died. Had it shipped all the way from Denver. She was so proud of it. He ran his hand over the dusty surface. "I couldn't bring myself to sell it, but I couldn't stand to hear it played either. Made the house too quiet." "I'm sorry," Nora said softly. "I won't play it if it bothers you." "No." Jack looked at her directly for the first time since coming in, those gray eyes intense. "Play it. Teach Thomas. Fill this house with music again. It's been dead too long." He left before she could respond, but his words echoed in her head all through supper preparation. It's been dead too long. He wasn't just talking about music, she realized. He was talking about himself. The first week passed in a blur of learning and adjusting. Nora threw herself into her new role with desperate determination, rising before dawn to make breakfast, spending her days cleaning and cooking and learning the rhythms of ranch life. Thomas became her constant shadow, chattering endlessly, asking questions, showing her everything from the chickens to the cattle to the complex hierarchy of barn cats. The ranch hands treated her with cautious respect, polite but distant. She heard them sometimes, talking when they thought she couldn't hear, speculating about the boss's quick marriage, wondering if she'd stick it out when winter came and the work got harder. Jack remained an enigma. He was courteous, appreciative of her efforts, but emotionally distant. He slept across the hall, woke before her, worked until dark, and maintained careful walls between them. They were married, but they were strangers sharing a house, orbiting each other like planets that never quite aligned. One evening about 10 days after the wedding, Nora was putting Thomas to bed when he asked the question she'd been dreading. "Did you know my first mama?" Nora's hand stilled on the quilt she was tucking around him. "No, sweetheart. I never met her." "Papa doesn't talk about her." Thomas's voice was small. "Sometimes I try to remember what she looked like, but I can't. Is that bad?" "No," Nora said gently, sitting on the edge of his bed. "You were very young when she died. It's not bad that you don't remember. Do you think she would have liked me?" "Oh, Thomas." Nora's heart cracked. "She loved you more than anything in the world. Your papa told me that." "He did?" "He did. And she would want you to be happy." Thomas was quiet for a moment, then reached out and took Nora's hand. "I'm glad you came. Papa is less sad now." The observation, delivered with a child's directness, hit Nora hard. Was Jack less sad? She couldn't tell. He seemed the same to her, controlled, distant, unreachable. But maybe Thomas saw things she didn't. After Thomas fell asleep, Nora went downstairs to find Jack in his study, bent over account books by lamplight. She hesitated in the doorway, suddenly uncertain. "Do you need something?" he asked without looking up. Thomas asked about his mother tonight. Jack's pen stopped moving. "What did he say?" "He wanted to know if I knew her, if she would have liked him." Nora stepped into the room. "He said he can't remember what she looked like." Jack set down his pen carefully, his face tight. "He was barely 2 when she died. I'm not surprised. Do you have any pictures of her? Something he could see?" "In the trunk in my room." Jack's voice was flat. "I haven't looked at them in years." Maybe you should, Nora said softly. For Thomas. So he knows where he came from. And what good would that do? Jack stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Looking at pictures won't bring her back, won't change anything. It'll just make him miss something he can't even remember. Or it might give him peace. Let him know his mother was real, that he came from love even if he lost it. Jack stared at her, something working in his jaw. You don't understand. Then help me understand. For a moment she thought he might finally let down those walls and let her see the man underneath all that control. But then his expression shuddered. I have work to finish. Thank you for looking after Thomas. It was a dismissal, clear and cold. Nora left, frustration and hurt warring in her chest. How was she supposed to build any kind of partnership with a man who wouldn't let her in? That night, lying in her narrow bed, she heard footsteps in the hallway. Jack's door opening, then closing. Long silence. When she finally fell asleep, she dreamed of gray eyes and walls too high to climb. The following Saturday, Jack announced they'd be going to town for supplies. You'll need to meet folks, he said over breakfast. Word's gotten around about the wedding. People will want to see you. The prospect filled Nora with dread. She knew what seeing her meant. Evaluating her, comparing her to Sarah, judging whether she was good enough for Jack Rourke. Red Mesa on Saturday afternoon was bustling with ranchers and their families, cowboys on their day off, shopkeepers doing brisk business. Jack drove the wagon down the main street and Nora felt every eye turn toward them. Whispers followed in their wake. That's her, the mail-order bride. A plain little thing, isn't she? Wonder what Jack was thinking. Nora kept her chin up and her eyes forward, refusing to show how much the words stung. Jack seemed oblivious to the gossip, greeting people with brief nods as he helped her down from the wagon. Mercantile first, he said. Make a list of what you need for the house. Don't be shy about it. We stock up for the winter starting now. Inside the mercantile, Nora tried to focus on supplies while pretending not to notice the cluster of women by the fabric counter, talking in low voices and shooting glances her way. The shopkeeper, Mr. Henderson, was friendly enough, helping her find items on her list and making suggestions about quantities. You'll want extra flour come January, he advised, and dried beans, rice, coffee. Gets hard to make it to town once the snow starts. As Nora was examining different grades of coffee, a voice spoke behind her. So, you're the new Mrs. Rourke. Nora turned to find a woman about her age, blonde and pretty, with calculating blue eyes. Yes, Nora Rourke. Lydia Marsh. My father owns the ranch adjacent to Jack's. We've known each other since childhood. The emphasis on childhood was deliberate. Such a surprise when we heard Jack had married. He's always been so particular. Lydia. Jack's voice was cold as he appeared at Nora's elbow. I see you've met my wife. Elbow. I see you've met my wife. I was just welcoming her to Red Mesa, Lydia said, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. It must be quite an adjustment, coming from civilization to this rough country. Nora's doing fine, Jack said shortly. If you'll excuse us. He steered Nora away, his hand firm on her elbow. Once they were out of earshot, he muttered, Don't mind Lydia. She's had designs on every unmarried man in 3 counties since she was 16. She's very pretty, Nora said quietly. She's very tiresome. Jack handed the shopkeeper his list. We'll take all of this, Henderson. Have it loaded in my wagon. Outside, they ran into Pastor Michaels, who greeted them warmly. Nora, Jack, how are you settling in, my dear? Very well, thank you, Pastor. Wonderful, wonderful. You must come to the church social next month. Good way to meet people, make friends. He lowered his voice conspiratorially. Don't let the town gossips bother you. They mean well, mostly. Just curious. After the pastor moved on, Jack took Nora to the small restaurant for dinner. The place was crowded with Saturday diners, and Nora felt conspicuous as they found a table. More whispers, more stares. A man approached their table, tall, well-dressed, with an oily smile that made Nora's skin crawl. Jack Rourke, heard you finally took a wife, Martin Shaw. He extended his hand to Nora. Welcome to Red Mesa, Mrs. Rourke. Thank you, Nora said, reluctantly shaking his hand. Shaw? Jack's tone was arctic. We're trying to have a meal. Of course, of course. Just wanted to congratulate you and to mention that my offer on your south section still stands. Prime grazing land, and I'm willing to pay top dollar. Not interested. Everything's for sale at the right price, Jack. Think about it. Shaw tipped his hat to Nora and moved away. Who was that? Nora asked. Martin Shaw. Owns the bank and half the businesses in town. He's been trying to buy up ranch land for years, consolidated under his control. Jack's jaw was tight. My father used to say Shaw would sell his own mother if the price was right. The rest of the meal was tense, Jack clearly irritated by the encounter. As they left the restaurant, they nearly collided with Lydia Marsh again, this time accompanied by an older couple who could only be her parents. Jack, Mrs. Marsh gushed, we simply must have you and your new bride over for dinner soon. It's been too long since we've seen you socially. We appreciate the offer, Mrs. Marsh, but we're quite busy with ranch work. Nonsense. Everyone needs to socialize. How about next Sunday after church? Nothing fancy, just a neighborly meal. Nora could see Jack searching for a polite refusal, so she spoke up. That would be lovely, Mrs. Marsh. Thank you for the invitation. Jack shot her a look, but he couldn't contradict her without being rude. Sunday, then. On the ride home, he was silent for several miles. Finally, he said, You didn't have to accept that invitation. The Marshes are... He trailed off. I know. Lydia wants you for herself, and her parents probably encouraged it for years. Nora kept her eyes on the road ahead. But we're married now, and I'm not going to hide away because some people are disappointed by your choice. Jack was quiet for another mile. Then, surprising her, he said, You handled today well. The gossip, the stares, all of it. Held your head up. What choice did I have? You could have fallen apart. Some women would have. I'm not some women. The words came out sharper than she intended. I've spent my whole life being looked at and found wanting, Jack. The women of Red Mesa aren't any harder to face than my own sisters. He glanced at her, something shifting in his expression. Your sisters. You never talk about your family. There's not much to say. I have 3 beautiful sisters who never let me forget I wasn't. A father who saw me as a disappointment and a burden. A mother who loved me but didn't quite know what to do with me. Nora shrugged. They sent me here as a joke, did you know that? They filled out the application to humiliate me, to make me a laughingstock. Jack's hands tightened on the reins. I wondered. The letter was too flowery, didn't match the honesty in your photograph. What honesty? In your eyes. He was quiet for a moment. Most people lie with their eyes, put on whatever face they think the world wants to see. But your eyes in that photograph, they looked tired and sad and real, like someone who'd stopped pretending. Nora blinked back sudden tears. No one had ever said anything like that about her before. No one had ever looked at her and seen past the plain surface to anything underneath. I thought you were just desperate, she admitted, willing to take anyone, even me. I was desperate, Jack said bluntly, but not for just anyone. For someone who understood that life isn't a romantic fairy tale. For a partner, not an ornament. Your letter might have been a lie, but your eyes told the truth. So I took a chance. They rode in silence for a while, the mountains purple against the evening sky, the air cooling as the sun descended. Finally, Nora said, For what it's worth, I'm glad they played that joke. I'm glad I'm here. Jack looked at her then, really looked at her, and something in his expression softened. Yeah, he said quietly. Me too. It was a small moment, a tiny crack in the walls he'd built, but it felt like a beginning. The dinner at the Marsh Ranch the following Sunday was exactly as awkward as Nora had feared. The house was ostentatious, decorated with expensive furniture that seemed out of place in Wyoming territory. Mrs. Marsh fussed over them with forced hospitality while Mr. Marsh talked cattle prices with Jack. Lydia spent the entire meal finding ways to reminisce about her and Jack's shared childhood. Remember the summer dance when we were 16, Jack? You were so gallant, fetching me lemonade every time my glass was empty. I don't recall, Jack said flatly. Oh, but you must. It was the summer before you went to work on your father's ranch full-time. Before you met... Lydia stopped abruptly, but the damage was done. Before you met Sarah. That's what she'd been about to say. Nora focused on her roast beef, trying to appear unbothered. But under the table, Jack's hand found hers and squeezed briefly, a gesture of solidarity, of choosing her side. After dinner, while the men were with Lydia and Mrs. Marsh. "So tell us about yourself, Nora," Mrs. Marsh said with false sweetness. "What did your father do back east?" "He owned a farm in Missouri." "A farm?" Lydia's tone made it sound like something distasteful. "How rustic. I suppose that's why you adjusted so quickly to ranch life." "Farming and ranching are quite different, but yes, I'm used to hard work." "Well, you'll certainly get plenty of that at Rourke Creek," Mrs. Marsh said. "Poor Jack has let that place become so practical. No feminine touches at all. Sarah used to have such beautiful flower gardens." "The house could use some work," Nora agreed carefully. "You must find it terribly isolating," Lydia continued. "Being so far from town, from civilization. And Jack is so intense, so focused on work. Sarah used to complain that he barely spoke to her for days on end during roundup season." "Lydia," Mrs. Marsh said, but there was no real reproach in her voice. "I'm just trying to help," Lydia protested. "Nora should know what she's gotten herself into. Jack Rourke is not an easy man to be married to. He's cold, distant, married to that ranch more than he ever was to Sarah. That's enough." The words came out harder than Nora intended. Both women stared at her. "My husband is a good man who works hard to provide for his family, and I don't appreciate hearing negative speculation about my marriage or comparisons to his first wife. If you'll excuse me, I need some air." She stood and walked out of the parlor before they could respond, her heart hammering. She'd never spoken to anyone like that in her life. Back home, she'd always been the quiet one, the one who absorbed insults and moved on. But she wasn't that person anymore. She found Jack in the front hall, clearly looking for her. "Ready to go?" "Please?" He didn't ask what had happened, but she saw his jaw tighten as they made their excuses and left. On the ride home, the silence was companionable rather than awkward. "Thank you," Jack said finally. "For what?" "For defending me. I heard what you said to Lydia through the door." He paused. "Most people wouldn't have stood up to her. She's used to getting her way. She had no right to speak about you like that, or about Sarah." Jack was quiet for a long moment. "Sarah and it wasn't perfect. We married young, had different ideas about what life should be. She wanted social occasions and refinement. I wanted to build this ranch. We loved each other, but it was hard sometimes." He took a breath. "Lydia isn't wrong that I'm not easy to be married to. I know that." "Marriage shouldn't be easy," Nora said. "If it's easy, you're probably not really trying." He looked at her with something like surprise. And then, for the first time since she'd met him, Jack Rourke smiled. Really smiled. Not just a polite curve of his lips, but something genuine that reached his eyes and transformed his whole face. "You're smarter than I gave you credit for," he said. "I'm smarter than anyone gives me credit for," Nora replied. "I'm just usually too polite to mention it." He laughed then, a rough sound like he'd forgotten how. And in that moment, driving through the Wyoming twilight with this man who was slowly becoming less of a stranger, Nora felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. October arrived with a crispness in the air that warned of winter's approach. The aspens on the mountainside turned gold, then blazed like fire against the evergreens before dropping their leaves in a single windswept week. Nora watched the transformation from the kitchen window while kneading bread dough, marveling at how quickly the landscape could change. She'd been at Rourke Creek for 6 weeks now, and the rhythms of ranch life had started to feel almost natural. She knew which hens were the best layers, which horses had temperamental dispositions, how to read the sky for coming weather. She'd learned to cook for hungry men who worked from dawn to dusk, to mend clothes torn by barbed wire and hard labor, to stretch supplies and plan ahead for the long winter Mrs. Chen kept warning her about. Thomas had become her constant companion, following her through daily tasks with endless questions and observations. He was teaching her about ranch life as much as she was teaching him letters and simple reading. Together they'd started a routine. After breakfast, an hour of lessons at the kitchen table. Then he'd help her with lighter chores while chattering about everything from cloud shapes to why horses had such big teeth. "Mama Nora," he said one morning, the title now coming naturally to him. Why do we have to learn letters? Papa doesn't read much. Your papa reads account books and contracts, Nora corrected, helping him form the letter B. Reading helps you understand the world, helps you know if someone's trying to cheat you in business. Oh. Thomas considered this. Like Mr. Shaw? Papa says Mr. Shaw cheats everybody. Your papa shouldn't say such things where you can hear, Nora said, trying not to smile. But yes, knowing how to read means knowing how to protect yourself. Jack had started joining them sometimes during these morning lessons, leaning against the doorframe with coffee in hand, watching with an expression Nora couldn't quite decipher. He never interrupted, never criticized her methods, but his presence felt significant somehow, like he was trying to understand something. One evening, after Thomas had gone to bed, Jack appeared in the parlor where Nora was mending his torn work shirt by lamplight. He held a book in his hands, turning it over nervously. I found this in the attic, he said. Thought Thomas might like it. It's got pictures. Nora took the book, a collection of fairy tales, the cover worn but the illustrations inside still vibrant. This is wonderful. Where did it come from? It was mine. My mother used to read to me from it. Jack sat down across from her, and Nora realized this was the first time he'd voluntarily sought out her company in the evening. Usually he disappeared into his study after supper or went to check on the livestock. She died when I was 8. Fever took her in 3 days. I'm sorry, Nora said softly. It was a long time ago. He stared at the book in her hands. My father never remarried. Just threw himself into building this ranch, working until he dropped dead of a heart attack at 55. I always swore I wouldn't be like that. But you are, Nora said gently. You work yourself to exhaustion every day. You barely stop to eat sometimes. Jack's jaw tightened. The ranch won't run itself. You have good men. Ben could handle more responsibility. You don't have to do everything alone. I'm not alone anymore. He met her eyes. That's why I married you, to have help, to have a partner. Then let me partner with you. Nora set down her mending. Teach me about the ranch beyond the house. Let me understand what you're doing, why you're doing it. You keep me in this domestic sphere, but I could be more useful if I understood the whole operation. Jack looked startled, as if this had never occurred to him. You want to learn about ranching? I want to understand your life. Our life, Thomas's inheritance. Nora leaned forward. What happens to this ranch if something happens to you, Jack? Who knows how it all works? Who could keep it running? The question clearly unsettled him. Ben knows most of it, and there are account books. That I can't read because you won't show me. I can add figures and keep household accounts, but I have no idea about cattle management, grazing rotations, market prices, any of it. She paused. You said you wanted a partner. Partners share information. Jack was quiet for a long moment, shadows from the lamp playing across his face. Finally, he nodded slowly. You're right. I've been treating you like just a housekeeper. That's not fair. He stood. Tomorrow morning, after Thomas's lessons, come to the study. I'll show you the books, explain how things work. True to his word, the next morning Jack ushered Nora into his study and spent 2 hours walking her through ledgers, explaining cattle operations, market conditions, the delicate balance of income and expenses that kept a ranch afloat. Nora listened intently, asking questions, making notes in the margin of her journal. You're good with numbers, Jack observed, watching her quickly calculate profit margins. My father taught me basic bookkeeping. He said even daughters should understand money, though he never let me near his actual accounts. Nora studied a column of figures. These feed costs seem high for autumn. Are you buying or using your own hay? Buying some. We had a dry summer. Hay crop wasn't as good as usual. Jack pointed to another entry. That's why I'm selling some yearlings early, before winter feeding costs eat up the profit. They fell into a routine after that. Every few days, Jack would spend time with Nora going over ranch business, teaching her to read the land and the livestock, explaining his decisions and reasoning. She soaked it up like drought-starved earth, asking intelligent questions that sometimes made him reconsider his plans. You should sell that south section to Shaw, Nora said one afternoon, studying a map of the ranch. Not the whole thing, but that narrow strip along the creek that's too rocky for good grazing. Use the money to improve irrigation on the north section. Jack stared at her. That's not a bad idea. Shaw wants to consolidate land. That strip would connect two of his parcels. He'd probably pay above market value for it. Nora traced the property lines. And you'd still have water access through the main creek channel here. When did you become a cattle baron? Jack asked, and there was something warm in his voice, something almost like pride. When you started treating me like a partner instead of just another mouth to feed. The words hung between them, honest and slightly sharp. Jack looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You're right. I did that. I'm sorry. It was the first time he'd apologized for anything, and the simple acknowledgement felt significant. They were building something here, Nora realized. Not romance, maybe not even friendship yet, but something solid, something real. The first snow came in late October, a light dusting that melted by noon but served as warning. Jack and the hands worked frantically to finish preparations, moving cattle to winter pastures, storing hay, repairing fences and outbuildings, chopping and stacking firewood until the pile beside the house stood taller than Nora's head. Winter here is no joke, Ben told her one afternoon when he came to the house for coffee. Last year we had a blizzard in November that lasted 3 days. Couldn't see your hand in front of your face. Lost 20 head of cattle that got separated from the herd. How do you prepare for something like that? Nora asked, pouring him a second cup. You don't, really. You just survive it. Ben grinned. But the boss is smart about these things. Always has more supplies than he thinks we'll need. Always plans for the worst. That's why Rourke Creek does better than most ranches around here. After Ben left, Nora found herself in the pantry, mentally inventorying their supplies against Mrs. Chen's dire warnings about winter. They had plenty of flour, beans, rice, coffee, salt. The root cellar was full of potatoes, carrots, onions, turnips. Preserved vegetables and fruits lined the shelves. Meat wouldn't be a problem with cattle right outside. But still, the thought of being snowed in for days or weeks made her anxious. What if something happened? What if Thomas got sick? What if... You're worrying, Jack's voice came from behind her. I can see it in your shoulders. Nora turned. Ben told me about last year's blizzard. It sounds terrifying. It was. Jack leaned against the doorframe. But we made it through. We always do. He paused. Having you here will make it easier, actually. Sarah used to panic during bad storms. Made everything harder. It was the first time he'd mentioned Sarah without Nora having to prompt him. She held very still, afraid to break whatever spell had made him willing to talk. She hated winter, Jack continued quietly. Hated being isolated, cut off from town. Used to beg me to take her to her parents' house for the season, but I couldn't leave the ranch. His expression was distant, painful. Our last winter together, she barely spoke to me, just stared out the windows like she was in prison. That must have been hard, Nora said softly. It was my fault. I knew she wasn't built for this life, but I married her anyway because I loved her. Thought love would be enough. Jack's laugh was bitter. Turns out love isn't enough when you're fundamentally mismatched. She was miserable, I was frustrated, and we just hurt each other. And then she got pregnant. And then she got pregnant, Jack echoed. She was terrified. Begged me to take her to Denver for the birth, to a real hospital. But I thought she was overreacting, thought women had been giving birth on ranches forever, thought the local midwife was good enough. His voice cracked slightly. I was wrong. Nora crossed the small space between them and, without thinking, took his hand. He looked down at their joined hands with something like surprise. It wasn't your fault, she said firmly. Women die in childbirth in hospitals too. You couldn't have known. I should have listened to her, should have put her fears above my convenience. Jack's fingers tightened around hers. I've spent 5 years telling myself I did everything I could, but the truth is I chose the ranch over her, and she died for it. You can't know that, Nora insisted. You can't carry that guilt forever, Jack. Sarah wouldn't have wanted that. How do you know what Sarah would have wanted? The question wasn't hostile, just genuinely curious. Because she loved you enough to marry you, to try to build a life here even though it wasn't what she wanted. Because she gave you a son. Because nobody who loves someone wants them to spend their whole life drowning in guilt. Nora squeezed his hand. She would want you to be happy. To give Thomas a real home, not a mausoleum. To move forward. Jack stared at her, his gray eyes intense in the dim pantry light. For a moment, Nora thought he might pull away, might retreat behind his walls, but instead he pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her in a fierce embrace that took her breath away. He held her like someone drowning holds a lifeline, his face buried in her hair, his breath ragged against her neck. Nora stood frozen for a heartbeat, then slowly wrapped her arms around him, feeling the tension in his shoulders, the barely controlled trembling that spoke of years of held-back emotion. "I'm tired," he whispered against her hair. "I'm so tired of being angry at myself." "Then stop," Nora said simply. "Choose something else. Choose to be here now, with me and Thomas. Choose to build something new instead of protecting something dead." They stood like that for a long time, holding each other in the pantry while afternoon light slanted through the high window. It wasn't romantic exactly. It was rawer than that, more honest. Two damaged people recognizing each other's scars and choosing not to look away. When Jack finally pulled back, his eyes were red but clearer somehow, like something had broken free inside him. "Thank you," he said roughly. "For what?" "For not being afraid of the truth. For saying what needs to be said." He touched her face gently, his calloused thumb brushing her cheek. "You're stronger than you look, Nora Rourke." "I've had to be," she said, and he nodded like he understood. After that day, something shifted between them. Jack stopped disappearing into his study every evening. Instead, he'd sit in the parlor while Nora sewed or read, sometimes talking, sometimes in comfortable silence. He started telling her stories about his childhood, about his father's struggles to build the ranch, about learning to break horses and mend fences and read the weather in the mountains. Nora told him about her life too, about growing up in her sister's shadows, about her grandmother who'd been the only one to see her as more than a disappointment, about the small rebellions that had kept her sane in a house where she was always wrong. "Your sisters sound terrible," Jack said one evening. "They're not terrible exactly, just thoughtless. They never meant to be cruel. They just never thought about how their words affected me." Nora set down her mending. "I used to be so angry at them, but now I'm grateful. If they hadn't played that joke, I'd never have come here." "You really mean that?" "Yes." And she realized it was true. Whatever hardships this life brought, it was hers in a way her old life never had been. Here, she mattered. Here, she was building something real. Jack reached across the space between their chairs and took her hand, a gesture that had become familiar over the past weeks. They sat like that, hands linked, watching the fire burn down to embers, and Nora felt a contentment she'd never known before. The first real storm hit in early November. The sky turned the color of old bruises, and the temperature dropped 20 degrees in an hour. Jack and the hands scrambled to get the cattle into sheltered areas, while Nora prepared the house, filling every container with water, checking lamp oil, pulling out extra blankets. Thomas pressed his face to the window, watching the clouds roll in. "Is it going to be bad, Mama Nora?" "Maybe," Nora said honestly. "But we're prepared. We'll be safe inside." The snow started at dusk, big, heavy flakes that quickly turned the world white. By the time Jack and the hands came in for supper, visibility was down to a few feet. The men ate quickly. Then Ben and the others headed to the bunkhouse while Jack secured the barn and checked on the livestock one more time. Nora had hot water ready when he came in, snow crusted on his coat and hat, his face red from cold. "It's bad," he said, stripping off his outer layers. "Going to be a long night." They stayed up late, feeding the fire, listening to the wind howl around the house. Thomas had fallen asleep on the sofa, and Jack carried him up to bed while Nora banked the coals and locked the doors. When she went upstairs, she found Jack standing in the hallway, looking lost. "What is it?" she asked. "This is the first major storm since Sarah." His voice was quiet. "I keep waiting to hear her pacing, worrying, making herself sick with fear." "I'm not Sarah," Nora said gently. "No," Jack agreed. "You're not." He looked at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "You're here. You're steady. You're exactly what I needed, even though I didn't know it." The words hung between them, weighted with meaning. Nora's heart hammered against her ribs. They'd been married for 2 months, but it had been a marriage of convenience, of separate bedrooms and careful distance. This felt like a threshold, a doorway opening to something neither of them had planned for. "Jack, she started, but he closed the distance between them, his hands coming up to frame her face. Tell me if you don't want this, he said, his voice rough. Tell me now. Because I'm trying real hard to be a gentleman, but Nora, She kissed him. It was impulsive and clumsy, and nothing like the chaste peck they'd shared at their wedding. This was need and wanting, and two lonely people reaching for something real. Jack made a sound low in his throat and pulled her closer, and Nora felt something break open inside her chest, something that had been locked away for so long she'd forgotten it existed. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jack rested his forehead against hers. I don't want you to think this is just because we're stuck in a storm together, or because I'm lonely, or... I don't, Nora said. I know what this is. Yeah? His hands were still in her hair, gentle but possessive. What is it? A choice. We're choosing each other, Jack. Finally. She smiled up at him. We did this marriage backward. Wedding first, everything else after. But maybe that's okay. Maybe that's better, even. Jack kissed her again, slower this time, with a tenderness that made her eyes sting with unexpected tears. Come to bed with me, he whispered against her lips. Not because you have to, because you want to, because we're building something here, you and me, and I want... He broke off, struggling for words. I want that too, Nora said simply. Hand in hand, they walked to his room, their room now. Outside, the storm raged against the house, burying the world in snow. But inside, in the warmth and the darkness, Nora and Jack finally became the partners they'd promised to be. Not perfectly, not without awkwardness and uncertainty, but with honesty and care and the beginnings of something that felt dangerously close to love. Afterward, lying in Jack's arms while the wind howled outside, Nora felt him trace the ring on her finger, Sarah's ring, which had become hers. I need to tell you something, Jack said quietly, about Sarah. About why I really advertised for a wife. Nora stayed quiet, letting him speak in his own time. Everyone thinks I loved Sarah so much I couldn't move on, and I did love her, but... He took a shaky breath. The truth is, by the time she died, we'd made each other miserable. We'd stopped sharing a bed months before she got pregnant, barely spoke except to argue. I was relieved when she stayed with her parents that winter, and I think she was relieved to be away from me. Jack, let me finish. His arms tightened around her. When she died, I felt guilty, but I also felt free. And that made the guilt even worse. What kind of man feels free when his wife dies? What kind of monster? A human one, Nora interrupted firmly. A human being trapped in an unhappy situation. Feeling relieved doesn't mean you didn't love her. It doesn't make you a monster. I spent 5 years punishing myself. Refusing to let anyone close, refusing to move forward, building walls so high nobody could climb them. He turned to look at her in the darkness. And then you showed up. Plain, honest Nora, who didn't expect anything except respect and hard work. Who looked at me and saw past all my defenses to the man I used to be, the man I wanted to be again. I'm not special, Nora whispered. You're exactly what I needed. Jack kissed her forehead, her cheek, her lips. You're patient and strong, and you don't ask me to be anything I'm not. You make this house feel like a home again. You make Thomas laugh. You make me remember that life is supposed to be more than just surviving. Nora felt tears slip down her temples. Nobody had ever said anything like this to her before. Nobody had ever seen her as essential, as important, as valued. I'm falling in love with you, Jack said into the darkness. I know that wasn't the deal. I know I said this was just practical, but I can't help it. You've gotten under my skin, Nora Rourke, and I don't want you out. Good, Nora said through her tears. Because I'm falling in love with you too, and I was terrified you'd never feel the same way. Jack made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob and pulled her impossibly closer. They held each other while the storm raged outside, while snow buried the ranch deeper and deeper, while the old life and the new life finally became one life, lived together. When Nora woke in the morning, pale light filtered through the window, reflecting off snow that had drifted halfway up the glass. Jack was already awake, watching her with an expression so tender it made her heart ache. Morning, he said softly. brushing hair back from her face. Morning. She smiled. How bad is it out there? Bad. Probably 3 feet of snow, and it's still coming down. We're snowed in for at least a couple of days. He kissed her nose. Whatever will we do with all that time? Nora laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years. I'm sure we'll think of something. A small voice called from down the hall. Papa? Mama Nora? Can I come out? It snowed, Jack groaned. Reality intrudes. He's going to wonder why I'm not in my room, Nora whispered. Then I guess we tell him the truth, that his mama and papa decided to share a room because that's what married people do. Jack kissed her once more. If that's all right with you. More than all right, Nora said. They dressed quickly and emerged to find Thomas in the hallway, pressing his face to the window with wonder. Look how much snow. Can we build a snow fort? Can we make snow angels? Can we... He turned and saw them both coming from the same room, and his eyes went wide. Are you married now? Like real married? Yes, Jack said simply. Is that okay with you? Thomas's face broke into a huge grin. Does that mean Mama Nora is staying forever and ever? Forever and ever, Nora confirmed, and Thomas threw himself at both of them, wrapping his small arms around their legs. Standing in the snowed-in hallway with her husband and son, Nora thought about the journey that had brought her here. Her sister's cruel joke, the train west, the terror of meeting Jack for the first time, all the uncertainty and struggle and slow building of trust. And she was grateful for all of it. Every hard moment, every doubt, every step that had led her to this exact spot, this exact life. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside, in the ranch house that had been so silent and sad for so long, there was warmth and laughter, and the sound of a child's excited chatter about snow forts and hot chocolate and whether the horses were cold in the barn. There was music in the house again. There was life. And for the first time since she was a little girl, Nora Bennett Rourke felt beautiful. Not because her appearance had changed, but because someone finally saw her the way her grandmother once had, as something precious, worthy of love, essential. The plain daughter had found her place. And it turned out that place wasn't plain at all. The storm lasted 3 days, and by the time it finally blew itself out, the ranch was buried under 4 feet of snow. Jack and Ben spent hours digging paths to the barn and bunkhouse, checking on livestock, making sure the animals had enough food and water. 2 calves had been lost, frozen despite their efforts, and Jack's jaw was tight with frustration when he came in for dinner the second evening. Could have been worse, Ben said, stamping snow from his boots. Remember the winter of '79? We lost 50 head. Doesn't make it easier, Jack muttered, but his hand found Nora's shoulder as he passed, a brief touch that steadied him. Thomas was ecstatic about the snow. He'd never seen so much of it, having been too young to remember previous winters clearly. Nora bundled him in every warm thing she could find and let him play outside in short bursts, watching from the window as he threw handfuls of powder into the air and tried to catch snowflakes on his tongue. He's going to wear himself out, Jack observed, coming to stand beside her. Good. Then maybe he'll nap and give us some peace. Nora leaned into Jack's warmth, still marveling at how natural this had become, touching him, being close to him, feeling his arm come around her waist like it belonged there. I've been thinking, Jack said slowly, about what you said, about selling that south strip to Shaw. And? I think you're right. It's not prime land, and the money could do a lot of good elsewhere. He paused. I want you to come with me when I negotiate with him. You've got a head for business, and I want Shaw to know this ranch has 2 people making decisions now, not just me. Nora turned to look at him, surprised. You want me in business negotiations? I want you as my partner, real partner, in everything. Jack's gray eyes were serious. That means you need to understand every aspect of this operation, including dealing with bastards like Martin Shaw. The casual profanity made Nora smile. Jack had been loosening up around her, letting her see the rougher edges he'd kept hidden at first. She liked it, this more relaxed version of her husband. All right, she said. But you have to teach me how to negotiate like a rancher. I don't know the first thing about it. You stood up to Lydia Marsh, Jack pointed out. That's harder than facing down Shaw any day. They spent that evening in his study, their study, she was starting to think of it, going over figures and strategies. Jack explained the intricacies of land values, water rights, grazing permits. Nora took notes and asked, "You're better at this than you think," he told her as midnight approached. "You see angles I miss." "That's because I'm used to looking at things sideways," Nora said. "When you're always on the outside, you learn to find unconventional solutions." Jack studied her across the desk, lamplight casting shadows on his face. "You're not on the outside anymore, Nora. You're the center of this whole operation. You know that, right?" The words made something warm bloom in her chest. "I'm starting to believe it." He came around the desk and pulled her to her feet, kissing her with a tenderness that still surprised her every time. "Come to bed," he murmured against her lips. "We can finish this tomorrow." Their bedroom had become a sanctuary, a place where the careful walls they both maintained during the day could come down completely. In the darkness, Jack told her things he'd never said aloud. His fears about failing his father's legacy, his worries about being a good father to Thomas, his dreams for what the ranch could become. Nora shared her own secrets, how she'd sometimes stood in front of mirrors as a girl, trying to see what made her sisters beautiful and her plain, how she'd taught herself to find worth in competence since she couldn't find it in appearance, how she'd almost backed out of boarding that train west a dozen times. "I'm glad you didn't," Jack whispered one night, his fingers tracing patterns on her shoulder. "I'm glad you were brave enough to take that chance." "I wasn't brave. I was desperate." Sometimes that's the same thing. By the time the roads were passable again, nearly a week had gone by. The enforced isolation had transformed something in all three of them. Thomas had fully accepted Nora as his mother, climbing into their bed in the mornings to snuggle between them, chattering about his dreams and plans for the day. Jack had shed the last remnants of his defensive distance, treating Nora not just as a wife, but as a true partner in every sense. And Nora had stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop, had stopped expecting to wake up and find this had all been a dream, that she was still in Missouri being mocked by her sisters. This was real. This was her life, built on honesty instead of illusion, and it was more than she'd ever dared to hope for. The first trip to town after the storm was an event. Everyone wanted to see how the ranches had fared, to share stories of near disasters and unexpected triumphs. Jack drove the wagon with Nora beside him, and Thomas wedged between them, the three of them looking like what they were, a family. The difference in how people treated her was subtle but unmistakable. Word had spread somehow that Nora Rourke wasn't just keeping house, but was involved in ranch decisions. When they entered the mercantile, Mr. Henderson greeted her by name and asked her opinion on different grades of flour. Women who'd been coolly polite before were warmer, more accepting. Even Lydia Marsh, encountering them on the street, managed a stiff nod of acknowledgement rather than her usual condescending smile. "What changed?" Nora asked Jack quietly as they loaded supplies into the wagon. "You changed. You stopped acting like you had to apologize for existing." Jack hoisted a sack of grain. "People respect confidence, even out here. Maybe especially out here." Martin Shaw found them at the hardware store, his oily smile firmly in place. "Jack, I heard you weathered the storm well. Only lost a couple head, I understand." "News travels fast," Jack said neutrally. "It does indeed. Small town, you know." Shaw's eyes slid to Nora. "Mrs. Rourke, lovely to see you again." "Mr. Shaw," Nora kept her voice level. "Actually, we were planning to call on you. My husband and I have a business proposition." Shaw's eyebrows rose. "Is that so?" "The south strip along Willow Creek," Jack said. "I know you've been wanting to consolidate that area. We're prepared to sell at the right price." "Well, now that is interesting." Shaw's expression turned calculating. "Shall we discuss this in my office? Say Thursday afternoon?" "Thursday works," Nora said before Jack could respond. 2 o'clock? "Perfect." Shaw tipped his hat. "I look forward to it." After he walked away, Jack squeezed Nora's hand. "Look at you, making business appointments." "Someone has to manage your schedule," Nora teased. "You just grunt and agree to whatever time he suggested." "I do not grunt." "You absolutely grunt. Ben does an excellent impression." Jack laughed, that rough sound she'd come to love, and pulled her close right there on the street, not caring who saw. "Your trouble, Nora Rourke." "You married me," she pointed out. Best decision I ever made. Thursday's meeting with Shaw went better than expected. Nora had spent the intervening days researching land values, talking to Mrs. Chen about local property sales, even casually questioning Pastor Michaels about Shaw's recent purchases. By the time they sat down in Shaw's ostentatious office, she knew exactly what that strip of land was worth to him. Shaw started with a lowball offer, as expected. Jack began to counter, but Nora put a hand on his arm. "Mr. Shaw," she said pleasantly, "that land connects your two largest parcels and gives you direct water access year-round. It's worth at least double what you're offering, and we both know it." Shaw's eyes narrowed. "Mrs. Rourke, perhaps you don't understand land values in this territory. I understand them perfectly. I also understand you're trying to consolidate holdings before the railroad expansion next year. That land becomes significantly more valuable once the rails come through." She smiled sweetly. "We can either negotiate a fair price now, or we can wait and see what other buyers might offer once the railroad announces its route." Jack was very still beside her, but she could feel his approval radiating through the contact of their arms. Shaw stared at her for a long moment, then laughed. "Well played, Mrs. Rourke. I see Jack's found himself quite a partner." He named a new figure, much closer to their target price. They haggled for another 20 minutes, Nora holding firm while Jack backed her up, until they reached an agreement that was actually favorable to the ranch. Shaw drew up papers on the spot, and they left his office with a bank draft that would fund the irrigation improvements Nora had suggested weeks ago. "That was incredible," Jack said as soon as they were outside. "Where did you learn to negotiate like that?" "I didn't. I just paid attention to what you've been teaching me, and I used the same skills I developed dealing with my sisters, reading people, finding their pressure points, staying calm when they try to intimidate you." Nora tucked the bank draft carefully into her reticule. "Shaw thought he could dismiss me because I'm a woman. That was his mistake." Jack stopped walking and pulled her into his arms right there on the sidewalk, kissing her thoroughly, despite the scandalized looks from passing townspeople. "Have I mentioned lately that I love you?" "Not since this morning," Nora said breathlessly. "Well, I do. You're brilliant and fierce, and you make me better than I am alone." He kissed her again. "Come on, let's go home." Home. The word settled over Nora like a warm blanket. Rourke Creek Ranch was home now, truly and completely. Not just a place she lived, but a place she belonged. Winter deepened its grip on the territory. More storms came, though none as severe as that first one. The ranch settled into a different rhythm. Smaller tasks, indoor work, long evenings by the fire. Jack taught Nora to play chess, and she beat him within a month, much to his mock outrage. Thomas learned to read simple words, proud of every small accomplishment. Letters arrived from Missouri in early December. Nora's mother wrote regularly now, sharing news and asking questions about ranch life with genuine interest. Her father's single letter was stiff and formal, but included a sentence that made Nora's throat tight. "I am pleased to hear you have found your place in the world." Her sisters wrote too, a joint letter that began with apologies and ended with curiosity about the West. Vivian had become engaged to a banker's son. Caroline was being courted by 3 different men and couldn't decide between them. Margaret asked if there were any eligible ranchers in Wyoming Territory, as she was dreadfully bored with Missouri society. "Your sisters want to visit next summer," Jack observed, reading over her shoulder. "Would you mind?" "It's your home too, Nora. Invite whoever you want." He paused. "Though I admit I'm curious to meet these women who were foolish enough to think they were better than you." "They were beautiful, are beautiful. So are you." Jack turned her to face him. "When are you going to believe that?" "I'm not beautiful, Jack. I've accepted that. But I'm valuable anyway, and that's better." "You're wrong." He cupped her face in his work-roughened hands. "You're beautiful because you're real, because you're strong and smart and kind, because when you smile at Thomas, your whole face lights up, because when you're thinking hard about something, you bite your bottom lip just a little, because you make this house feel alive." He kissed her gently. "I see you, Nora, all of you, and you're the most beautiful thing I've ever known." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "You're just saying that because you love me." "I love you because it's true." Christmas came with a fresh snowfall that turned the world into a pristine white wonderland. They had a small celebration, just the three of them and the ranch hands for a special dinner. Ben had carved a set of horses for Thomas, who was thrilled beyond measure. The other hands contributed small gifts, a pocket knife, a warm scarf, a bag of peppermints. Nora had knitted scarves for all the men and baked enough cookies to feed an army. For Thomas, she'd made a stuffed horse to match his carved ones and a new shirt embroidered with his initials. For Jack, she'd spent weeks working on something special. When he opened her gift on Christmas morning, his hand stilled. It was a quilt, pieced together from scraps of fabric that told their story. Blue from her traveling dress, brown from his work shirt, red from Thomas's first shirt that no longer fit, calico from curtains she'd made for the kitchen. In the center, she'd embroidered the ranch brand and the date of their wedding. "Nora," he breathed, I don't have words." "You gave me a home," she said simply. "I wanted to give you something that showed how much that means." Jack set the quilt aside carefully and pulled her close, not caring that Thomas was watching with interest. "I love you," he said against her hair. "God, I love you." His gift to her was simpler but no less meaningful, a leather-bound journal with her name embossed on the cover, and inside the front flap, an inscription in his bold handwriting, "For Nora Rourke, who made our house a home and my life complete. Write our story so we never forget how blessed we are." Nora clutched the journal to her chest, overwhelmed. "It's perfect." That night, after Thomas had fallen asleep and the house was quiet, Nora and Jack sat by the fire wrapped in her new quilt. Outside, snow fell softly, but inside was warmth and peace. "I wrote to your sisters," Jack said suddenly. "Last week. Sent them a letter." Nora sat up. "You what?" "I told them the woman they mocked has more courage, kindness, and beauty than anyone I've ever met. I thanked them for sending me my wife." He smiled. "I may have been a little less polite than that, actually." "Jack, what did you say?" "I told them they were fools who couldn't recognize treasure when it was right in front of them, that their cruelty had brought me the greatest gift of my life, and I hoped someday they'd be wise enough to regret what they'd done." He shrugged. "I also might have mentioned that you've proven to be a better rancher than most men I know, and that you negotiated circles around one of the shrewdest businessmen in the territory." Nora started laughing, then crying, then laughing again. "You didn't!" "I absolutely did. Nobody gets to make my wife feel small, not even in memory." She kissed him then, pouring everything she felt into it, gratitude and love and wonder that this fierce, protective man was hers. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jack rested his forehead against hers. "I spent 5 years being half alive," he said quietly, "going through motions, building walls, protecting myself from feeling anything. And then you showed up, awkward and uncertain, and trying so hard to be what you thought I needed. But what I actually needed was exactly what you were. Someone real, someone honest, someone who'd see past my walls to the man still trapped inside." "I was so scared when I got off that train," Nora admitted. "Scared you'd take one look at me and send me back. Scared I'd spend my whole life being a disappointment in a new location. I took one look at you and thought, she's terrified, but she's here anyway. That's someone strong enough to build a life with." Jack traced her jawline with his thumb. "And I was right. You're the strongest person I know, Nora. You crossed half a country to marry a stranger, learned an entirely new way of life, stood up to town gossips and business sharks, and you did it all without losing who you are. That's not just strength. That's grace." "I learned from you," she said. "You showed me what it looks like to be strong without being hard, to be capable without being cruel. You gave me space to find out who I could be when I wasn't trying to be someone else." "We saved each other," Jack said simply. "That's what partners do." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the fire burn down. Finally, Nora spoke again. "I want to write to my sisters, not to rub anything in their faces, but to really tell them about this life, about what we've built here." She paused. "I want them to know that their joke became the greatest blessing of my life." "Do it," Jack encouraged. "Show them what they helped create, even if they didn't mean to." Nora began writing the next day, filling pages with honest accounts of ranch life, the hardships and the rewards, the storms and the beauty, the slow building of love between two people who'd started as strangers. She wrote about Thomas and his gap-toothed smile, about learning to negotiate land deals and manage cattle operations, about finding strength she never knew she had. She wrote about Jack, about his rough edges and tender heart, about how he'd taught her that worth wasn't measured in pretty features, but in honest effort, about how he looked at her like she was the most precious thing in his world, and how that look had taught her to see herself differently. The letter she finally sent was 10 pages long, and when her sister's responses came weeks later, they were different than before. Less performative, more genuine. Vivian wrote that reading about Nora's life had made her question her own choices. Caroline admitted she'd always been jealous of Nora's relationship with her grandmother and wished she'd paid more attention to what mattered. Margaret flat out said she wanted to visit and see this new sister who'd become someone she hardly recognized but desperately wanted to know. "They're growing up," Jack observed when Nora shared the letters with him. "People do that sometimes when reality knocks them around a bit." "Do you think they really mean it about visiting?" "Only one way to find out. Tell them they're welcome next summer, after calving season." He grinned. "We'll put them to work. See if they've got any of your grit under all that beauty." Winter began loosening its grip as February arrived. The days grew incrementally longer, the sun stronger. Ice melted from the eaves, dripping music onto the porch. The cattle grew restless, sensing the coming change of seasons. One morning, Nora woke feeling strange, slightly dizzy, faintly nauseous. She blamed it on something she'd eaten and went about her day, but the feeling persisted. By the third morning, realization began to dawn. She waited another week to be sure, then another week trying to figure out how to tell Jack. She was excited but also terrified. Memories of Sarah's death in childbirth haunted the edges of her happiness. Finally, one evening as they were preparing for bed, she just blurted it out. "I'm pregnant." Jack froze in the act of removing his boots. "What?" "I'm pregnant. I think. I'm almost certain." Nora twisted her hands together. "I know it's sooner than we probably should have. I mean, we've only been really married for a few months, and with what happened to Sarah." Jack crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "A baby," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "We're having a baby. You're not upset?" "Upset?" He pulled back to look at her, and his eyes were wet. "Nora, you've given me everything, a real home, a partner, a reason to wake up happy, and now a child? How could I be anything but grateful?" "But Sarah, you're not Sarah," Jack said firmly. "And this time, I'm doing everything right. We're going to Denver for the birth. I'm hiring the best doctor money can buy. I'm not taking any chances with you." "That's expensive." "I don't give a damn about the expense. You're more important than money, more important than this ranch, more important than anything." He cupped her face in his hands. "I'm not losing you, Nora. I can't. You're the best thing that ever happened to me." His intensity should have been frightening, but instead it made Nora feel safe, protected, cherished in a way she'd never experienced before. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Me too. But we'll be scared together, and we'll get through it together." Jack kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "You're strong, remember? Strong enough to cross the country alone, strong enough to build a life from nothing, strong enough to handle anything." That night, they lay awake talking about the future, about names and nurseries, about whether Thomas would be excited or jealous, about all the ways their life was about to change again. Jack kept one hand on Nora's still flat stomach, as if he could protect the tiny life growing there through sheer force of will. When they finally slept, it was tangled together, holding each other against the darkness and the fear and the beautiful uncertainty of what was coming. Thomas took the news with the enthusiasm only a 5-year-old could muster. "A baby? I'm going to be a big brother? Can I teach it to ride horses? When will it get here? Can I name it Thunder?" "Not Thunder," Nora said, laughing despite her nerves. "But yes, you'll be a big brother, and you can help take care of the baby." "I'll be the best big brother," Thomas declared with utter confidence. "I'll protect it from everything." The ranch hands were congratulations and concern in equal measure. Ben pulled Jack aside one day, and Nora overheard their conversation from the kitchen window. "Boss, you sure you want to be doing this? After what happened with—" "I'm sure. Jack cut him off. "And this time it'll be different. We're taking every precaution." "She's a good woman, your Nora. Hate to see anything happen." As spring arrived in earnest, painting the mountains with wildflowers and filling the air with the sound of newborn calves, Nora felt her body changing. She grew rounder, slower, tired more easily. Jack hovered constantly, trying not to be obvious about it, but watching her like she might shatter at any moment. "I'm not made of glass," she told him one afternoon when he physically removed a laundry basket from her hands. "I know, but humor me anyway." Jack set the basket aside. "I need to feel like I'm doing something." So Nora let him fuss, understanding it was his way of dealing with fear. She let him carry things and help her with tasks she could easily manage alone. She let him wrap her in blankets when she wasn't cold and bring her tea she didn't want. Because beneath the fussing was love, pure and fierce and slightly terrified. By June, when her sisters arrived for their promised visit, Nora was 6 months along and glowing with health despite her fears. She watched the wagon approach with mixed emotions, excitement and anxiety warring in her chest. Vivian stepped down first, looking around with wide eyes. "Good Lord, Nora, it's so vast." Caroline followed, her pretty face awed. "And beautiful. I never imagined it would be beautiful." Margaret was last, and she ran straight to Nora, throwing her arms around her. "Look at you! You're pregnant, and you look so—" She pulled back, studying Nora's face. "Happy. You look happy." "I am," Nora said simply. Her sister's visit was transformative in ways none of them expected. They threw themselves into ranch life with surprising enthusiasm, learning to gather eggs and help in the kitchen, listening with fascination as Nora explained ranch operations and cattle management. They were hopeless at most physical tasks, but they tried, and their genuine effort went a long way toward healing old wounds. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple, Vivian spoke quietly. "I'm sorry, Nora. For everything. For the joke. For all the years of making you feel small, for being too blind and selfish to see what was right in front of us. We thought we were so clever," Caroline added, "sending you out here to be humiliated. But you weren't humiliated. You thrived. You became someone amazing," Margaret finished. "Someone we should have seen all along." Nora felt tears prick her eyes. "I forgave you a long time ago. That joke gave me this life, Jack, Thomas, the ranch, all of it. I should be thanking you." "No," Vivian said firmly. "You should never have needed that cruelty to find your worth. We robbed you of years of confidence, years of knowing you were valuable. That's not something to thank us for." They sat in silence for a moment, watching Jack and Thomas in the distance, working with one of the horses. Jack looked up and caught Nora's eye, smiling that rare, genuine smile that transformed his face. "He loves you," Caroline observed. "Really loves you, not just married because it's practical loves you." "I love him too," Nora said. "More than I knew it was possible to love anyone." "You're lucky," Margaret said wistfully. "You found what most people spend their whole lives searching for." "I found it because I stopped searching," Nora corrected. "I stopped trying to be something I wasn't, stopped apologizing for existing, stopped measuring myself against impossible standards. And once I did that, I could see what was really valuable." Her sisters stayed for 2 weeks, and by the time they left, something had shifted between the 4 Bennett sisters. They would never be the same as they might have been if they'd grown up treating each other with kindness, but they'd found a new understanding, a fresh start built on honesty instead of hierarchy. The summer passed in a golden haze. Nora's belly grew round and heavy, but she remained strong and healthy. Jack kept his promise. As her time approached, they made the journey to Denver, leaving Thomas in Mrs. Chen's capable care. They took rooms in a hotel near the hospital, and Jack hired not 1 but 2 doctors to attend the birth. When labor started on a cool September evening, exactly 1 year after their wedding, Jack paced the hospital corridor like a caged animal. The doctors tried to send him away, but he refused to leave, planting himself outside the birthing room door with the immovable determination of a man who'd made a promise to himself. Inside, Nora labored through the night, thinking about Sarah, about all the women who'd come before, about the thin line between life and death that childbirth represented. But she also thought about Jack waiting outside, about Thomas back at the ranch. about the life she'd built and refused to leave behind. When her daughter finally arrived with the dawn, squalling and perfect and alive, Nora wept with relief and joy and sheer exhaustion. The doctor brought Jack in, and he stood at the bedside, staring at his wife and new daughter with an expression of such profound gratitude that it made the nurses tear up. "She's perfect," he breathed. "You're perfect. You did it, Nora." "We did it," Nora corrected, placing the tiny bundle in his arms. "Together." They named her Sarah Grace. Sarah for the mother Thomas never knew. Grace for the grace that had brought Nora to Wyoming and into Jack's life. The name felt right. A bridge between past and future, honoring what was lost while celebrating what had been found. When they brought Sarah Grace home 3 weeks later, Thomas was beside himself with excitement. He'd helped Mrs. Chen prepare the nursery, practiced being quiet, and made a solemn vow to be the best big brother in all of Wyoming territory. The ranch hands lined up to meet the new addition, each one more awkward and sweet than the last. Ben carved a tiny wooden rattle. Pete presented a small blanket his wife had made. Sam, barely more than a boy himself, offered a silver dollar for her future. That night, with Sarah Grace sleeping in her cradle and Thomas finally settled in his own bed, Nora and Jack stood at the window of their bedroom, watching moonlight silver the landscape. Jack's arms were around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. "Thank you," he said softly. "For what?" "For being brave enough to get on that train. For giving me a second chance at everything. At love, at family, at being the man I wanted to be." He turned her to face him. "For seeing past the walls to the person underneath. For making this house a home. For giving me Thomas and Sarah Grace in the best year of my life." "Just 1 year?" Nora teased gently. "The first of many," Jack amended. "The first of a lifetime." He kissed her then, slow and deep and full of promise. Outside, wind whispered through the grass and night birds called to each other. Inside, their children slept safe and warm, and the house that had been so silent and sad just 1 year ago was full of life and love and hope. Nora thought about the girl she'd been, plain, overlooked, convinced of her own inadequacy. That girl had boarded a train west expecting humiliation and had found transformation instead. She'd discovered that beauty wasn't about symmetrical features or golden hair. It was about being fully alive, fully present, fully yourself. She'd learned that love didn't require perfection. It required honesty, effort, and the courage to be vulnerable. It required choosing each other, day after day, through storms and struggles and ordinary moments that built into something extraordinary. She'd found that home wasn't a place you were born, but a place you created, brick by brick, choice by choice, with people who saw your worth even when you couldn't see it yourself. The mail-order bride who'd arrived in Wyoming as a joke had become the heart of Rourke Creek Ranch. The ugly daughter had discovered she was beautiful after all, not despite her plainness, but because of everything underneath it. The woman nobody wanted had become the woman someone couldn't live without. And as Jack held her close while moonlight painted their bedroom silver, as their daughter slept peacefully and their son dreamed of horses and adventure, as the ranch settled in for the night all around them, Nora Bennett Rourke finally understood what her grandmother had tried to tell her all those years ago. Beauty wasn't something you were born with. It was something you became when you stopped hiding and started living, when you stopped apologizing and started belonging, when you opened your heart to love and let someone love you back exactly as you were. She was beautiful now. Not because her face had changed, but because she'd finally found someone who looked at her and saw everything, the strength and the fear, the courage and the doubt, the ordinary surface and the extraordinary soul beneath. Jack Rourke had taken one look at a woman the world called plain and seen his perfect match. And in learning to see herself through his eyes, Nora had discovered the most beautiful truth of all. She was enough. She had always been enough. She would always be enough. And that knowledge, that bone-deep certainty of her own worth, was more valuable than any conventional beauty could ever be. It was the gift Jack had given her by choosing her, by seeing her, by loving her exactly as she was. The ranch stretched out around them in the darkness, 3,000 acres of possibility and promise. The mountains stood sentinel in the distance, eternal and unchanging. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, indifferent to the small human dramas playing out beneath them. But in one ranch house in Wyoming Territory, in one bedroom where moonlight slanted through the window, two people who'd started as strangers held each other close and marveled at the beautiful life they'd built from honesty and hope and the courage to take a chance on love. The cruel joke had become the greatest love story. The unwanted daughter had found her place. The practical arrangement had transformed into a passionate partnership, and the man who'd thought he could never love again had discovered that the heart, once broken, could heal stronger than before. This was their story. This was their triumph. This was the legacy they would pass to their children and their children's children. That true beauty comes from being fully, honestly, courageously yourself. And that love, real love, sees past surfaces to the eternal worth of a human soul. Nora had been sent west as a joke. She had arrived as the family disappointment, the plain daughter nobody wanted. But she had become something far more important: a partner, a mother, a woman who knew her own worth and demanded that others recognize it too. She had become beautiful by being seen, and in the seeing, in the loving, in the daily choice to build something real and lasting, she had found everything her heart had ever yearned for, and so much more besides. The story that began with mockery ended with triumph. The journey that started with shame ended with pride. The marriage that seemed doomed from the start had become the foundation of a love that would last generations. And if you listened carefully on quiet Wyoming nights, if you stood on the porch of Rourke Creek Ranch and let the wind carry whispers from the past, you could almost hear the echo of music, a grandmother's music box playing its sweet, sad song, reminding everyone who heard it that the most beautiful people are often the ones the world overlooks, and that true love sees with eyes of grace rather than judgment. This was Nora's story. This was Jack's redemption. This was the proof that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places, and that the joke life plays on us can become the greatest blessing we never knew we needed. They had found each other in the wilderness. They had built love from honesty. They had created beauty from plainness. And they had proven, beyond any doubt, that the heart knows its own home, regardless of what the eyes see or the world says. The mail-order bride had found her perfect match, and in finding him, she had found herself. That was the real magic. That was the true transformation, not from plain to pretty, but from lost to found, from invisible to seen, from unloved to cherished beyond measure.